And we're
cool.
here.
I got pinged.
We did it. We're live.
We're live.
Yeah, a bunch of us got pinged. Yeah, hopefully me shifting around doesn't constantly affect the audio going on here. We have approximately 0 viewers, and I'm ready to go, dude. I don't know about you. I'm ready to go. Like, just this whole thing has me, like, in kind of a no F's given kind of a mood. You know, the governor's making his speech downstairs. My mom's hanging on to every single word. I, quite frankly, don't give a fuck about any of it because it's like, wow. Talk about just, like, you know what the governor sounds like? He kind of sounds like that old man that it's like, that you could just tell is just trying to make everyone feel better during a crisis. And, like, I admire him for it. He's doing his job well. But he still has no idea what he's talking about, even with, like, all the scientific experts stacked next to him, which is kind of the thing that, like, doesn't lend legitimacy. Also, like, I kind of imagine in my voice that, like, every time a politician dies, a baby dies simultaneously. And I'm not putting that, like, not dies. Every time a politician speaks, a baby dies. That's the word that I was going for. And so, with all that being said, what's up, people? I'm Dom, the movie nerd. This is Chris, the TV nerd. Yes, Chris, I love that you picked up on the having to put the TV in your nickname, because that works perfectly. I was too lazy. I just put the movie nerd in my thing. But
hey man, you know, you got
Chris,
a job to do.
Yeah, I do. But yeah, so Chris, we're here. We're doing another podcast, but we're doing a little bit of an experiment this time. We're doing a live stream.
We are.
1:40 on a Saturday afternoon. Hopefully some people actually start to realize it.
Well, either way, I mean, they'll hear it eventually. Maybe not if they don't tune into the live stream as much. Maybe not as soon as, you know, they can. But either way, this episode will see the light of day.
Yeah, most definitely. And so, Chris, with all this going on in the world right now, this is the topic of today's episode, if you will. Shit, I just realized I got to shut off all notifications there.
Yeah, you definitely should shut off all notifications.
Yeah.
Now here comes the
problem is I don't know how to mute them on my computer without muting like all the volume, because then I won't be able to hear you.
Then fuck it. This is the live stream podcast.
We're doing it live.
We're doing it live.
Screw
exactly.
it.
And if you're listening to this months from now and it comes out, we didn't do it. We did it live when it first aired.
We did it live,
out.
People.
But we do this more often, so now you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with that being said, Chris, as you could tell by your shirt that you have on, the subject of today's episode is one that we have been wanting to do for a while now.
Since I'd say the inception of this.
Yeah,
show.
well, not just since the inception of the show, just like since the inception of like when we met. Like that's how long this thing is going. Because I think from the minute that I met you, instead of the How I Met Your Mother, I'm waiting for when they eventually make the TV show or the movie about it, and it'll be called, you know, How I Met Chris if I do it. I don't know what it'll be called, though, then, if it's going to be like some other third person doing it.
I don't know.
But the point being is that when we first met, that was like when I was like the height of my Game of Thrones craze, because season 5 was senior year of high school. Then we got season 6. My first year of Duchess, that first semester, that was before we met, because we didn't meet until the fall, but Game of Thrones 6th season had already aired in its entirety. And I was just like, whoa, this is like the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Battle of the Bastards and all that jazz.
Yeah, and so we were chilling, we were talking about it a lot, but you made it clear to me that there was this one show that to you probably had the biggest impact in your entire life growing up. Me and my situation was a little bit different because I didn't get into like peak TV until I was a lot later in high school. I think like junior year of high school is when I started, but I was just binging shows nonstop that were like way past their prime. Like I binged Sopranos, I binged Entourage, I binged Boardwalk Empire, I binged Sons of Anarchy, I binged a ton of shows. Mostly when I was growing up, it was mostly just cartoons. And like I was very privileged enough to be, in my opinion, growing up during the height of the Cartoon Network craze, let's call it. Like I'm talking shows like Ben 10, the original Teen Titans, Codename Kids Next Door, Ed, and Eddie, like the list goes on, and it only got better as time went on.
Yeah, you and me both,
run
man.
Of Star Wars: The Clone Wars,
Grim Adventures.
I was around for that. Yeah, lots of good stuff that decade. But for you, you were already getting into a little bit more of mature TV. And because, my parents tortured me with NCIS after NCIS episode, but I didn't realize they were bad at the time. But you were into the show that arguably I would say was kind of the defining show of its decade, the Game of Thrones of its day, if you will.
Yeah, so basically my history with the show that we're going to cover today, which is Lost, the greatest television show of all time.
Oh, come on. No, we were gonna keep up the ambiguity like Lindelof and Houston for the entire show.
We can't, because we just got to get right into this. Basically,
so right. We can't make the same mistakes that they did.
There was no mistakes made, man, and that's what we're going to get into.
We're going to find that out today.
And so, you know, my history with Lost is I actually started watching, I caught up the summer before the final season, because I was still a super little kid too when all that was airing. And, you know, there's there's some suggestive scenes, although it's like an ABC show, or so it never really got quite there. But you knew it was going on, and if you can understand context, you can get that when Jack and Kate went off into the woods alone.
Yep.
So, anyways,
they showed like some straight getting down and dirty scenes too.
Yeah, no, I mean it definitely took its chances, and so like for me, I kind of binged it all the summer before the sixth season came out with my mom. We kind of like watched that show, and so it's like there was like pretty intense things for like I want to say like 12 or 13. Like some of that stuff with the others when that first comes around, like pretty scary, and so it's like Lost is like stuff. It's like a time capsule to me.
Yeah, it's definitely some dark stuff right there, most definitely.
Yeah, it's like a time capsule to me. So basically...
Yeah, like there's a reason why my parents wouldn't let me watch stuff like that, and then I go back and watch it. Of course, it seems tame to us now, but it's like... Yeah, that there was aside from just that, like there are a lot of reasons why Lost was considered like kind of the peak TV show of its day. Like there's always usually a drama and the comedy. The comedy obviously at the time was The Office, but it's weird because the whole thing with The Office, I feel like The Office was one of those shows that didn't gain popularity until years later. Like I feel like it being on Netflix really helped out a lot with that.
Well, I will just say that The Office is my second favorite show of all time and my favorite sitcom. That decade is very near and dear to my heart. But Lost for me is sort of like a time capsule because it's just like one of those things where like I've watched it so many times at so many different points in my life, and I know I will continue to do that going forward. So it's almost like if you have like a certain place that maybe you used to visit with your family when you were little, and then you also went to that same place with your friends as you were growing up, and then maybe like even as you get older you go with a different group of people and you have like a different memory at like each time something new could come back to you from your past where you were mentally when you were watching it. And so that's like kind of like me with Lost. Like there's like one specific moment recall. Yeah, exactly. There's like one specific moment I remember in like the sixth season where Saeed is still in the the Dharmaville, and it's super dark, and Jin's like, you can't be here, like you're gonna ruin our way of life. And I always just remember like sitting there watching that for the first time. And then there's like another moment where they first see that crazy giant like electric fence, and I just remember like sitting on my couch at my old friend Steve's house, and I was like, dude, this is like a good episode to get into Lost with, because I knew he like needed like someone to get thrown into an electric fence to get him to watch this show. And there's just like so many memories like I have with like trying to convince people to watch this show, and just be like where I was at with this show. So yeah, aside from it just being a fantastic show, I'd be lying, and I need people to know that what I'm about to say about this show also comes from like a place of sort of sentimental value and just nostalgia. So
yeah, it looks like this show had an effect on you, to say the least. Yeah, we're going to get into all of that, because I definitely also have some things to say, because this is another, I feel like we're in a little bit of a trend here, similar to our Scott Pilgrim episode that we recorded not at all recently. This is another thing where you definitely have a lot more fondness for this material than I would say I would, because I got into it kind of a little bit late in the game, but I'm still able to appreciate what the show did, what the show brought to obviously the pop culture landscape, the television landscape, everything. And I will admit that like it is a well done show. There are a lot of aspects about this show that like really impress me, especially like the two things that I get out of that is A, the type of storytelling that they were able to accomplish on a network scale, and B, just the overall like filmmaking. Like it was a show that didn't feel like other shows. It was a show that like you act like it's shot entirely on location. Like the camera angles are actually dynamic. It's not just the typical sitting still, except for like one occasional camera rotation. Like that there's a lot of dynamic shooting that goes into it. There's intrigue, there's mystery, but it was mystery that didn't feel forced. It was like actual like legitimately mystery. Like when you first landed on that island with the survivors of Oceanic Flight 815, you were kind of you were kind of thrown in. You were kind of in their shoes, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
It's like the audience, the castaways were kind of vessels for you. You were kind of discovering everything with them as you went along with them on their individual journeys. And what was also unique is Lindelof also introducing a technique that he would utilize on, I know for a fact, Watchmen, just this year previously, which is kind of utilizing every episode as giving a little bit of backstory to one of our characters, therefore fleshing them out and also helping to incorporate that into the greater overall story. And that's actually a narrative technique that I really liked how he implemented. I think he actually did it a little bit better on Watchmen, probably because it was a miniseries, so he only had like that one idea, so like he knew he had to be tight. But with Lost, obviously, very experimental. He had plenty of room to experiment with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you are giving Lindelof a lot of credit, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't sort of speak about two other people who who sort of really pioneered this show, and sort of, even though one was a producer and one was a director, Mr. Drew Goddard was the most seen directing episodes of the show, and he actually would sort of stop into the writer's room and they would be like, hey Drew, if you were directing this, how would you see it go down? And oftentimes his critique sort of changed the way that they wrote the scene, and the characters sort of came to life. And same with Carlton Cuse on the producing side. And that's because, I think it's no secret, but in case you guys don't know, and one of the reasons why I love Lost so much and respect it, taking all nostalgia aside, is because of the fact that like this whole thing can be viewed as like a huge lesson in screenwriting and producing a show, because they were strangleholded, strong-armed, whatever you want to call it, by Disney the entire time to keep it going. They wanted it to be just a concise 2-3 season story at first, because if you think back then, shows were 23, 24 episodes long, so you could tell like maybe a 6-season Netflix show in that time length. And B, they really never had an ending in sight because of all this. They were sort of always trying to make it up on the fly in between seasons, and even when the writer's strike came, even then they had to like readjust. So that this show has been through so much, but not just Damon Lindelof. Like, even though J.J. Abrams sort of helped get the pilot off the ground, and he was like on set, and he shot like the first few episodes, but he kind of quickly left, and a lot of people don't know that. They really like to credit him, but like he was confident in Lindelof, but Lindelof also had Drew Goddard and Carlton Cuse sort of always hanging around and really helping him bring it to life. So I think the three of them, when I think of like the creative team behind Lost, I think of course Lindelof at the helm, but I think those two guys are right there with him. And I mean, dude, this was like almost barbaric the way that ABC sort of forced them to keep going. So that's why, yes, there is problems, but I credit it a lot.
I actually wanted to bring that up. I wanted to bring that up actually because I don't remember the name of the. I feel so bad, but I think the channel's name was Rite. I think was the channel that I sent you. I sent you a channel list.
I don't remember that, but
kind of broke down every season.
We'll link it in the description later because it was pretty cool.
Well, yeah, but what I found from going through that, kind of everything that Lindelof and Cuse were going through, is that I don't necessarily look at it as kind of them being forced to do it. The whole thing was that ABC gave them kind of an extra 3-season order, which they didn't even, which like was just unheard of at the time. And the whole thing is like they accepted. So, like, that's
True.
the thing that I come back to at the end of the day, is they still could have said no. And, like, I get that, like, they were fighting, obviously, with the network, but also, like, just given, like, how business relationships, like, in that sense, with that high up work, I can't imagine that it's, like, they were willing to. It's like, okay, we've got the biggest TV show, arguably, on the planet right now, and we just got an extension for another 3 seasons. Like,
who's saying no to that?
You know people as well as I do. Like, at that sense, like, that kind of totalitarian like takeover happens. Oh wow, some good alliteration.
Well, would you take the deal at that point in time?
I would have.
Yeah, me too.
Are you kidding me? I'm running the biggest fucking show.
Yeah, me too.
At the time, I am not saying no. If Disney comes to me and is like, "Hey, we're going to extend your contract. We're going to give you an extra 3 seasons," which again, keeping in mind that is unheard of.
Yeah.
Like that just didn't happen for these types of shows. Like again, this isn't like an FX. This isn't, none of the streaming services are around at the time. Like this is
True.
around what, 2006, 2007 that this extension happens.
Mm-hmm.
Like that stuff just didn't happen. Like this is ABC we're talking about. So I guess if anything, I give credit to Disney, and keeping in mind also that a certain CEO took over at this time that we both, love to shit on, that being Bob Iger, because Bob Iger replaced Michael Eisner in 2005. Now, obviously, I don't know how much of a hand he had in this, or which executive obviously dealt directly with them. But yeah, I appreciate how you bring up J.J. Abrams, but I actually have a debunker to further debunk your debunk, which is that
sure, let's hear it.
J.J., you gave him credit for the first couple episodes. J.J. directed the pilot. That was it. That was the only episode that he directed.
Well, 1 and 2 though, because the pilot's like a 2-part.
Right. 2 parts, right? But again, the whole thing with Lost and their fans, and I've asked you numerous times, like, so
the whole
LAX in the end, 1 episode or 2, like, because the whole thing is that
depends on who you ask.
I hate when networks do this too, where networks will line their episodes up back to back. So it's technically like, oh, is it 1 episode or is it 2 episodes? But they're both like broadcasting at the same time. It's like, make up your goddamn mind. It's like they're trolling us on purpose.
I've seen Walking Dead do that shit, and it's so annoying.
Mr. Robot has done that.
Okay.
Where it's technically a 2-parter episode because it's an hour 40, hour 50, but obviously with commercials it ends up being a full 2 hours because they want it to be like a like a televised movie.
Right.
But yeah, and Lost was notorious for that. But the thing that I liked about the first 5 seasons is that, okay, at the very least they were clear and specific. Like, okay, like for the most part, all the premieres that were two-parters, those were 2 episodes. Like, it's technically pilot part 1 and pilot part 2. To the point where the last one, and I'll tell you what they especially tried to mess around with was the first season finale, Exodus, where I'm pretty sure that episode was on 2 different weekends, like one weekend and then another. But that's 3 episodes technically, because you got one 1-hour episode and one like hour 40 episode, and I'm like, what? Like, this is bullshit. But like, at the very least on Netflix, thank God for the streaming, because that shit clears it right up. It's listed as 3 episodes, like, because Exodus parts 1, 2, and 3.
You know, they really tried to milk this show for all it was worth. But I think that's a testament to how strong it was at the time. I mean, I remember reading I listened along to this podcast actually called Feels Like the First Time. And so they rewatched Lost in 2016. And they did a really cool thing where each week they would sort of pull up like how many people tuned into that episode at the time. And dude, preposterous ratings. Like they had like hundreds of millions of viewers at the end of each season. Like absolutely crazy. So I can totally see why they'd want to, stretch a finale or...
It's unprecedented because, again, even that's kind of still at that weird transition point in the late 2000s where like streaming is starting to become a thing, and there are alternative things like that. Like, obviously it's not like the 80s with like MASH or Cheers. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, it's either MASH or Cheers and that's it, like you got this show on this night or this show on this night, and if you miss it, there's no DVRs, nothing. DVR was a thing, so people could like watch it on repeat. Again, there are other channels, there were other shows they could watch, like HBO, basic cable was becoming a thing. Like, this isn't like the only show that you can watch or else you'll miss it. Like, technology had kind of improved at the time, but like to show that there's that many people tuning in for each one of these finales, like that shows that this definitely had an impact, and like everyone was watching it,
even to the bitter end in those controversial last seasons. Now we've sort of spoken about like the history of Lost and like the creators, and I mean, yeah, they took the deal, but they still at the end of the day were met with like a lot of sort of blocks by the studio. Like, the studio was never too into them fully being super sci-fi. They wanted it to be more of like a drama set in an island with these like beautiful looking people, but they wanted to really even dive in deeper into like the sci-fi and the heavier stuff, and that's why you don't really sort of get more of the smoke monster and the flash sideways and all that type of stuff until those last few seasons, predominantly more so in the 5th and 6th season, especially the 6th with the whole flash sideways storyline. So it wasn't an easy road, but nonetheless the fans still love the show, and I think that's why I kind of want to dive in to why the show is so polarizing. First of all, like, it's either you love or you hate Lost. There's no like, yeah, it was a good show, I enjoyed it. There's no like, I mean, if you're out there, comment right now or let us know, because I haven't met you, and I've spoken about this show with just about everyone I know, and so like, why do you think it's just such like a hard right or hard left type show?
Because at the time, again, it's kind of something similar to like every single time you get one of these big, huge properties, which is that again, at that point, you're not talking about just like something. The key difference to keep in mind, obviously, about easily as far back as now, 10 years ago, which is when Lost ended, and now, is that now there are so many different options when it comes to this sort of thing. Like, people have newer. There's so much stuff that it's like. The reason why I said that Game of Thrones was like the last big show that everyone tuned into is because it really was. Like, now there's just too many options. Now I feel like for one show to kind of be the most talked about show, it's like, yeah, it's going to be like one of the 5 most talked about shows if it's lucky.
Yeah. Stranger Things was certainly an anomaly.
Yeah, definitely, especially when it came out. Like, if anything, Stranger Things was and still is an anomaly. But it's like, yeah, if you're not watching Stranger Things, you could just as easily go and watch like BoJack Horseman or any one of the numerous HBO shows that started up.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's kind of that change in thought process where now, instead of funneling and putting all their resources behind one giant flagship show, studios have always done this, but now they're really leaning into it, which is, again, making sure that they have multiple consistently good content. I kind of like that, but again, it also takes away from kind of the peakness of it. And that, I think, is why, going forward, you're not going to see a situation like Game of Thrones, like Lost, like Seinfeld, like Sopranos, all these shows that were like the show to watch. And therefore, everyone was disappointed. I still have a hunch that most of that disappointment comes not from the actual finale itself and the quality that went into it, but just the fact that people were having to say goodbye to certain of their shows. And all they needed, very similar to the times we're facing right now, was just that little bit of disappointment, and boom, millions of people are blowing up. Add the internet to that years later, where that seems to be just the climate of everybody blowing up, and boom, there you go.
Yeah, so, that's interesting, and I do see all that. My only question is, like, don't you think that, like, the cream will still rise to the top? like for example, a Stranger Things, I mean, it's definitely tougher for there to be a show that everyone's watching and everyone's talking about. Or do you think that as like more new streaming services seem to come out by the day, it's just gonna? Do you think that even?
I think it's too subjective at this point.
Yeah.
I really do. I think it's too subjective at this point. Where think about it this way, because now we have the internet, and now everyone has a voice, and everyone can have like their one favorite show. You know, like that's the whole thing. There's plenty of options. Put it in this perspective. The streaming and the television world right now is like an all-you-can-eat buffet. It used to be like, okay,
so true.
You've got this one restaurant, and it's the best place in town. Everyone shows up at it. Therefore, when that place closes, everyone's going to go nuts because it's like their favorite place, and there's like nothing else to do, and they have to go like half an hour out of the way in order to get to another good place. But now, literally, it's like a string of all-you-can-eat buffets, and they're all pretty good, but you know that you have plenty of options even if you don't like the one. And that's kind of what the television landscape is right now. So it's not necessarily a matter of kind of the quality will rise. It's just a matter of, even if there is quality, everyone's going to have their own favorite thing. You know? Like, I know one guy's favorite show is this. I know one guy's favorite show is this. I know one guy's favorite show is this. And now there's just that point where it's like, yeah, that's the new normal.
And there's so much out there. You might not even have seen like half of those people's favorite shows.
Yeah.
And it's not your fault.
Yeah.
It's just that there's so much out there. And, you know, this also kind of feels like sort of like the relationship between like, you know, Jack and Locke, in the sense that like, yeah, I see what you're saying. I kind of have a slightly different opinion, but like at the end of the day, we're both sort of like, you know, aiming for like the same goal. You know what I mean? To sort of like watch more television and find more television, but we sort of have like a different view of how it's going to rise to the top. And so like that's the thing about like even this conversation with Lost, it's like splitting us in like two different directions, because I hear you, and like I still think though that the cream will rise to the top. So like with that being said, like do you think that some of like the way that Lost sort of played Jack and Locke against each other, do you think that they knew what they were doing? Because I've always like loved asking people who like study this type of question, because they very much so ushered the audience, in my opinion, to either far left or far right. You know what I mean? Do you think that they knew what they were doing by doing that, or was that just luck?
I'm actually glad that you brought that up, because what I think it comes down to is neither. I don't think it's luck. I don't think it's just a matter of, okay, that, you know, they just got lucky because it happened. No, it was good writing with two different characters, with two very good themes. And I'm honestly really sad that Lost kind of went away from that, because something that was pointed out in that series, and one of the reasons why, even though I liked the last couple seasons because they were fast-paced and action-packed, and there was so much usually happening that they were throwing at you each minute of each episode that you didn't really have time to stop and think. And I enjoyed that in the moment. But for post-viewing thinking and kind of analysis, it kind of really does set specifically those last two seasons really down a peg. Because when you think back, yeah, those first couple seasons may have been a little bit slower. And I'll even admit, I was not a fan of certain of the first couple seasons because I thought of how slow they were. But the more and more I think about it, it's just like the dynamic with the characters. Like, that to me is where the strength of the show lies, like in any other show. And if we're talking specifically about Jack and Locke, it's the fact of what made those two diametrically opposed viewpoints so relatable is that they weren't channeling these big grandiose ideas of teleporting islands, all these crazy sci-fi ideas, and how the island basically had God living on it. It's that it was just two guys with two different sets of beliefs that were arguing with each other. And that's a super relatable concept. Like, that's the thing to me that at the end of the day set Lost apart from the others, is that it was good writing, good storytelling, and interesting characters that you cared about. Like,
right.
Because for the first time, like, you have a network TV show introducing diametrically opposing viewpoints and not necessarily showing that one is more right than the other. Because there's points where you're rooting for Jack most of the time, if you ask me, and there's points where you're rooting for Locke. You know, it's like, because like even if Locke is 100% wrong, just because you want him to succeed, just because latching onto the idea that faith alone can reward you with certain things, you know? I will say that that's a certain relative topic that I find I've run into a lot in my life now, but yeah.
Dude, no, you're 100% right. And so, you know, that to me is sort of like the magic of the show. And so I think I have like sort of a unique experience. I've watched it almost 10 times now. And so I started watching it when I was like 12, 13, and I'm 26, and I still every few years visit this show. And so to me, like my earliest memories of watching this show, I was divided, but because I liked the people so much. And then as I got older, my sides sort of switched. When I was younger, I was more team Matthew Fox. I was more, with Jack. And as I got older, I'm like really on board with Terry O'Quinn. And I just think that's because as your mind develops and as your views change, like I was starting to, so when I was little, I wasn't thinking about like, all I was thinking about was I like him. He seems good. He's going to get them safe. And now that I'm older, I'm like, well, I like the way that he looks at the world and I like his worldview. And so what I'm trying to say is this show has layers and they have such a large ensemble cast. And they did this at such a time in television where like, just to have a chronological story that keeps going and doesn't start and stop, like you brought up NCIS at the beginning of this, like that was for the most part in network television before we had shows like Lost come in and sort of be like, well, why can't we tell a continuous story, and so like just to manage this much and then all these different things, you have your sci-fi element, but you have your love triangle, multiple love triangles, like dude, they had such a tall order with this show. And so I think you're right. I think that's part of the magic, and I think that's why people expected too much, because there was just, this is a perfect storm of amazingly, like everything that's gripping you in is everything that's too impossible to conclude in a way that makes everyone happy,
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that was a problem that Cuse and Lindelof realized early on. But what they also had on their advantage, obviously, which, again, even as recently as 10 years ago, very similar to what we talked about in the Scott Pilgrim episode, like the landscape and just reception and reaction to TV.
Yeah.
Had just changed. It was still so different.
But I think Lost is like one of the catalysts for that change. Like I don't think we would have had
100%.
Breaking Bad see the same success that it hadn't we had people got used to that, like, cool, so I'm going to wait all season to pick up where we left off, all summer to pick up where we left off last season, and like
it was definitely, I would very much attribute, everyone gives Breaking Bad kind of that credit for kind of the idea of peak TV, where it's kind of bringing that back, where it's like, oh my god, you have to watch that. But I would argue much more so that Lost kind of kickstarted that way before Breaking Bad ever did.
And I don't think Lost is alone in doing that. There was other shows too, like Firefly got canceled, but that was certainly, if they would have kept that going, that would have been like the same structure. But I think like the success of Lost, because again, like Firefly got canceled around that time, audiences weren't that in tune to that sort of kind of world continuing, not just being like a start and stop Buffy the Vampire Slayer type thing, So like Lost, to me though, it kind of, I think, opened up like just this whole new avenue of the way that we and appreciate TV, and also like the quality of which we can produce television as well. Like Lost is so cinematic, and you can even see that even more as we get to like the fifth and sixth season especially. Like yes, maybe there is a dip in quality of writing, I'm not going to debate you on that, but like at the end of the day though, like the show's attention to detail and cinematic quality, set design, I mean, that got more grandiose, almost rivaling movies for what they were able to do back in like that early decade. Would you agree with that, or what's your take on all that?
Yeah, 100%. And again, taking it from like kind of a mythology standpoint. Like I don't know if you probably knew this, because I don't think I've ever seen a bigger Lost fan than you.
Well, thank you.
Obviously, kind of the idea that like JJ and Lindelof were kind of they literally just like made out a list of mysteries and concept ideas in like the original, I don't remember what it's called, but it was just like, it was like a Lost pamphlet that contained like every single idea that they had for where they wanted to inject the mythos.
Well, this goes to J.J. Abrams' Mystery Box TED Talk that he did around this time.
Yeah, I think I forgot the name of the manual, but it was something along those lines where like they had ideas for where the mysteries would go into, and kind of, but what it does really well, again, it's both J.J. Abrams' strength and weakness, and I don't know how much credit J.J. gets and how much versus how much credit Lindelof gets versus Cuse and all those guys, which is kind of the setting up of the mysteries. Again, it's something that unfortunately we kind of know now after seeing The Rise of Skywalker that JJ is great at setting up stuff, but not so good at following through.
I mean,
not so good at following through.
He was only on the first 2 episodes of the show, as you told us earlier on. So.
Yeah, and it's a great pilot. So I guess just kind of my thought process around that is that, okay, they had 2 different options that they could go in. Mm-hmm. They could keep it strictly a Survivor show with kind of the more mystical sci-fi elements in the background. Again, playing it very smart, which is exactly what Game of Thrones did. Keeping those elements were always there and in the world and part of the setting, but they were that's all that they were. They were just part of the setting. They were just part of the background. Same thing with Lost. I feel like, and now again, this is me coming from it, having only just finished the show for the first time, from my analytical perspective, from what I've seen, I think that had they maybe focused more on the survivor's journey and kept it more relatable with the characters, as opposed to diving into kind of more of the sci-fi elements, I feel like that could have given them more time, I think, to kind of come up with them, conceptualize them better, figure out how to incorporate them better into the story, and therefore kind of lead up to a better finale. Because again, it's the thing about the last 3 seasons of Lost specifically that's so frustrating. Again, my problem, some of the more critiques that I'll have with the whole show, but specifically with the last 3 seasons that's so frustrating is that all the ideas, all the seeds for great ideas are there. You know, like they're drastically shorter than the first 3 seasons. They flow like crazy. Like it is so much, for me, I found it so much easier to binge these last 3 seasons than it was to binge the first 3. I think the action is stepped up. I think that the stuff that they're bringing up is interesting, like kind of like the different like the show establishes it's a really great iconography. Like you're right. The images that are in that show are very, very memorable to me. Like the Dharma, all the different Dharma signs. For me, I think specifically, and again, maybe because I just finished it, but the temple, like all the different stuff, like how they placed the position, like the mise en scène.
Yeah, the temple was great.
The wides, it was impressive to say the least. I'm like, holy shit, like. For a network TV show, I got to give this stuff a lot of props. But again, it's a situation where they were kind of making it up as they went along.
Yeah. It definitely showed in that last season too, I would say. Unfortunately, and most definitely. I feel there's a magic to that, to the improvisational nature of it. But I think like at that point, when you're that established and you're that successful, it also kind of, I can see how people see it.
You become a victim of your own
success. I can also see how people see it as maybe like, ill-timed or not really, like maybe they just say like, oh, well, they don't really, if they don't care about it anymore, why should I? I can see why people have given that argument.
Which again is kind of part of the reason why I'm guessing that's something else that Lindelof and Cuse realized early on, which is why they kept having to bring up the idea of, and this is unfortunate where we got to go into an, I'm sure, a topic that you've had to argue with people a lot about before, the idea of them kind of lying to their audience. And we know that that's nothing new. That's not a new phenomenon in Hollywood. That's been going on since time immemorial. If anything, the only difference between now and back then is that people are much more aware of it now because of the internet. But back then, obviously, again, like, the internet was still kind of just getting onto the edge. It was the late 2000s. Like I don't know what the landscape was like, but it obviously was not to the extent that it is now. Like online chat forums and blogs were a thing, but like the type of instantaneous access, like there was still like a slow trickle down effect that kind of erupted as of that. But my whole thing and kind of why I may find it so egregious, so much more egregious what they did, is kind of them using it as a strategy to just get people to watch the show. It's like, I'm sorry, but like if you're the biggest TV show on the planet right now, why do you have to consistently lie to your fans? Especially because if we're just talking about the Lost fan base and kind of why I give them so much credit is the fact of that was kind of one of the first like big TV show cult fan bases that were like trading like kind of like how you would discuss like a new Star Wars TV show, like a new nerd property, but like on that level. It was kind of the thing that I would say that Lost was the thing that kind of kicked off this nerdessance, whatever you want to call it, that we're kind of living in right now. Like I really do think that Lost kicked that off because it's like, even with something like Sopranos, where you were getting a movie a week, you weren't like getting the discussion chat boards. It's like, okay, how do certain symbols lining up at this certain angle, what could that potentially be?
Yeah, like, true. I mean, I was definitely too young for the forums, but I've heard rumors of the forums and how, on the podcast of the day, just
went into
exactly. And you know what? Thank God they did, because they were telling us so much, though, throughout the entirety of the show, that if you just looked, paused, took a moment to take it all in, you would have. So that's why I also think that like this show did what also other network television's shows didn't do at the time, in the sense that like, there was always more than meets the eye. It really took show don't tell to the next level as far as context clues go and the symbolism and the way they used it. So I think that like a part of like people's gripes with the finale and the way they wrapped it up is because I think a lot of people feel like, oh well, so what, in the last episode they just hoodwinked us and they pulled it out of nowhere. Well, they kind of did, and I think an argument can be made that if you really paid attention and you saw like the story in between the frames, so to speak, like if you read between the lines, because there was symbolism and imagery throughout the entirety of this show. Yes, again, it still was maybe not the strongest send-off, although I love the finale, and I think it's perfect because I took the time to go in and read all of, like, the Lostpedia and all that type of stuff, and, like, sort of see the screenshots and people, and it opened my eyes, and I was like, oh, they were kind of hinting at this the whole time. But, again, I think it's also a sign of the times where people didn't really know to do that at this point in time, and B, they weren't expecting that. So that's just another one of the risks that I think this show took, and obviously consequently it also does suffer a bit from it. But I don't know, what's your take on all that? Because that's kind of why I forgive it, because like if you're really into this, if you're like a Lost addict like I am, then like that's just more rewatch value there for me, because we're not getting any more of it, unfortunately, you know?
I guess if I'm going specifically with some of the things that I was thinking of is that, like, so you talked about the finale specifically. My whole thing with that is that I find, and kind of what I find egregious is, again, it's one thing to kind of lie and say that you have a master plan and that everything is going to be revealed when you clearly don't. That's one thing. We know that. We've made our peace with that. What I'm confused about is why they constantly went back on what they were saying specifically. I'm not talking about having a plan and following through with it. I'm talking about ideas. So the whole thing, obviously, is that a lot of people were confused to say, it's like, so wait, they were dead the whole time, which led to Lindelof and Hughes having to come out and state, no, everything that happened on the island, that happened. That was true. That was real. You know, that there wasn't any facade about that. The flash sideways, you know, that was purgatory. And they're like, the problem is that like 3-4 years ago, Lindelof specifically stated that, yeah, we're not going to do anything like that because people will see that as cheap and people will see that as a cop-out. So it's one thing when you have people saying that, but when it's the show's creator admitting to the fact that that type of an ending is a cop-out, and then doing exactly what he said would be a cop-out, that I feel like is where the frustration comes from, and that to me is way more understandable and relatable. It's like, okay, well, again, it's not just some schmuck online who's saying that. This is the show's creator. This is the guy basically admitting, yeah, that thing that we said we were going to do, yeah, we changed our minds. We just did, we just didn't do that.
Yeah, no, okay. So I've obviously thought about that a lot, and so I have two opinions on this, right? So as a fan, I'm kind of right there with you, but then as a creator who also is a fan of the show, I mean, there's so many times where I write a song and then 6 months later I'll listen back and I'll be like, oh, there was an opportunity there for maybe this instrument or this or that. And but when you're in it and when you're in the moment and the energy's there and, you just like, you're so close to the end and it feels so sweet because you've been working on it for so long, you sometimes miss things. And especially with how much of a tall order Lost must have been. So like, I come at it from two sides, but I'd be naive if I was to say that like I didn't at least recognize the frustration, and I can see it as legitimate sort of critiques that like you and many people have told me. I personally, it doesn't bother me that much because like the ride for me was way better than the destination, so that's like another reason why I forgive it. But yeah, I can understand that. And the last episode isn't my favorite, but you know what, I think that the thing that it does the most is honor these characters who I love so much. I mean, dude, there are characters in this show who are like, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, like most important characters that I love more than other shows that are my favorite shows. They're leads. That's just so, like I can forgive a lot with this show. And like I said at the top of this episode, keep in mind, this comes from a bias. It is my favorite show, but so
right, and I understand all that going in, and which as I feel like why I'm kind of unable to understand a lot of complaints about this a little more, because again, this is not my favorite show. I didn't watch this growing up. I watched this kind of like just as seeing like how this is an essential piece of American pop culture television, must watch, or in this case could have been, because I still do think that there are certain elements, specifically in the later seasons, that to me not only break some of the and not only break with some of the things that the show set up and then just went in a wildly different direction, to the point where it almost feels like it's a trend and a feeling that I've kind of gotten now in a lot of different media, which is that where every new thing feels like a retcon of the previous one. Now, in some senses, that can be good storytelling and, they work it really well, but in some senses, it's definitely a situation of like where, okay, we're just now getting into this new struggle that we have to make up, and it starts to feel less and less natural and starts to feel repetitive. Like that's an issue that I ran into with Sons of Anarchy. That's an issue I'm running into with this season of Ozark, which I just started watching, and I'm only 2 episodes into. But yeah, so like,
that kind of goes to like what I guess I was trying to say, and I'm glad you said that, because I can further chisel away at what I was trying to say about like how I feel about that 5th and 6th season in specific, because I think you kind of saw this coming on in the 4th season of Lost, but you still had some of that magic, because I think the writer's strike, which the third and fourth season sort of went through, really benefited in that these were people who were new to the scene, people who were just trying to like make a name for themselves. So I think you got super high quality work on those third and fourth seasons. It was different because they weren't the union writers. They were, Brian K. Vaughan, an amazing comic writer who wrote Why the Last Man Saga. They brought him up to the big leagues. So he was really giving it his all because he had kind of always wanted to be in television, and here's his shot. Completely different because he comes from a different medium, but then sort of as that died down and they kind of went back to more union staff in the fifth and sixth seasons, and they knew an ending was in sight. I think at the beginning of the fifth season, we introduce new problems, we solve it. At the beginning of the sixth season, we have the whole temple thing, and then that, how that ends. The show ends. So
yeah, especially like, if we want to talk about the sixth season specifically, I feel like that was the one where it's like, okay, we're gonna set up this thing. Okay, we need to get them to the next location. Let's just end it, and it starts to feel like kind of that instead of like, oh no, okay, this is the next logical step of what would happen here. Especially to the point where it's like, again, by that point, we're in the show's sixth season, and again, just talking from this is something that you and I have talked about a lot, but just from like a basic screenwriting, the last, and again, why the sixth season for a lot of people is the most egregious one, is that your finale is where you are starting to wrap stuff up. You do not add more things. Like that's just, it's one of those kind of concrete rules that you don't break. You know that as a creator. It's like, regardless of what happens, when things need to wrap up, they need to wrap up. Stories have beginnings, middles, and ends. It goes back to, again, it's this iconic Coen Brothers quote. I think it's Joel Coen that made it, that he kind of was explaining, like, why he preferred movies over TV. It was like, because movies have beginnings, middles, and ends. TV has beginnings, middles, and then they just go on forever. They have no ending.
Yeah.
And I feel like this show is kind of like a backup of that, where, again, like when you're on your show's last season, like everyone has been kind of on your train at this point. They've been riding it. They've stuck with you even after arguably the show had already jumped the shark 3 seasons ago, which again, that's a term that I hate using. I think that's stupid because to me, that kind of demeans the storytelling potential that shows have. I think that's kind of like a really easy way to stick a show inside a certain box and not allow it to expand and grow beyond what it is conceived as initially, which I think is a integral part of the creative process in general, and not trying to put things in boxes and give labels to them, which again, that's why kind of creativity and advertising can sometimes butt heads a little bit. But with me, like that was the most egregious thing, where you set up that whole temple just specifically, and what did it amount to? You brought back Widmore. Great. For what reason? Yeah. Because at least by that point, like, yeah, Widmore was a pretty intimidating character when he was first introduced, but at that point, it's like, what the fuck did he actually have to do? Like, for all that he did, first of all, the Man in Black does way more than anything. Whitmore's literally just a prop. Well, I'm like, okay, so they literally just put, from what I'm seeing on screen, they only put this here so that they could have them get on that sub so they could do that. And that's not even getting into some of the problems that I have with the whole Jacob and Man in Black origin, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, no, I mean, dude, listen, like I said, I know it's not a perfect show. It's my favorite show. And so I see all that. One thing that I kind of want to switch gears to is, this is one thing that I love talking about with people who not only just enjoy the show, but like kind of like you and I who like commentate on it and sort of study this type of thing is, I never got bored of the island. I never got bored of those beautiful establishing shots of Hawaii, and it really was just them trudging through the woods of whatever island. I think it was Oahu or something that they shot on, and like, what is that a testament to? Because setting is very important for shows that have as many episodes as Lost. And
what is it a testament to? I mean, again, just good filmmaking.
Okay.
To me, the best in the best media is one where everything, I'm talking your characters, your setting, your story, your edit, everything is important. Like, there's a thought process and there's a means behind every single decision that is made. And obviously, again, just kind of the allure of this desert island. We've been hearing rumors about the Bermuda Triangle. That goes back all the way to Greek mythology with kind of those original storytelling techniques. Kind of where they were part of the fun of the Odyssey to me was after they left Troy and kind of how they were accursed by the gods and how every single time they would wash up on an island, it would be just like a new race of monsters. First the Cyclops, then the Laestrygonians, then what's it called? Then the cannibals, then the sirens, the sorceress Circe, all that different stuff, and like that was kind of part of the fun of it, So I think in that sense, just from an iconography standpoint, that's one reason. But again, it just comes down to good storytelling. Like, you have a great setup, you have a great mystery, and the whole. And again, I feel like part of the reason why another reason why the show is just from a conceptual standpoint is it broke its number one rule, which again, if we're going to put this thing in any kind of a box, it's that it's a mystery show and it didn't solve any of its mysteries. So like from that logistical standpoint, it did not live up to its premise. That is not good storytelling to me. Just tackling that from my perspective.
No, I mean, dude, I can see that. To me, that is part of the fun, though, in the sense that, like, I still, every now and then, will look up a good lost, conspiracy theory video and see if there's a new hot take out there, because they left it so open-ended. And I know that is more so just the community keeping it going and sort of, not covering up for the bad writing, but sort of just, like, embracing it, I would say. Or not bad writing, but bad storytelling, bad structure, if you will. Because yes, you're right, like there should be an end, especially with the show that had this many sort of converging storylines and how they all literally come together at the end to have so many open answers is absurd. But to me, that's kind of like part of the whole, what baffles me about the legacy of this show, because like for how much everyone says it's not perfect, it's still always thrown around in that conversation of like very influential and important and like you said, iconic, or you keep bringing up iconography, which is a word I have never heard you use to describe a show on this show yet. So like there's got to be a reason for that. But like, so why is it that you think, because I want to hear it from someone who has watched it once and watched it to sort of have this podcast and sort of analyze it, like why do you think that like even with all these flaws people still can forgive it?
I think part of it is the nostalgia factor. I think a big part of it is the nostalgia factor. Part of the fact of, at the end of the day, like when you remember certain things, certain thoughts, certain feelings that you had while you were watching it, people still remember the idea of, okay, this show was on at a time when no other network was doing something like this. Like, it's big when HBO is looking at Lost and being like, damn, Because think about it, The Sopranos ended... Lost came out when The Sopranos was already starting to wind down. Like, The Sopranos aired its 5th season when Lost started in the fall, and then it switched to the spring after the writer's strike. The Wire was winding down, but The Wire, that's the thing that everyone confuses about The Wire. The Wire only became a cult hit after the DVDs came out. The Wire was not a huge thing. Like, nobody was talking about that show when it came out. And, there was no other show that was doing that. And so that's a big part of the reason why people remember that, is they remember that at a time when they were watching something. So it kind of like gives them that unique feeling. But also, it's just the sense of like, if you just take it from, a storyteller perspective, like I think of the best shows out there, and to me, Lost incorporates elements that make it one of the best shows out there. Like narratively, it was interesting, but it wasn't just the fact that it was doing stuff that was different. It was also that it was doing something that was old-fashioned. Like, it was doing good old-fashioned storytelling. Like, there was not a ton of exposition. The characters' interactions were mostly dialogue-based just to get to know each other or to deal with situations like how we would do it. Again, it was good storytelling, first and foremost. And I think that still is a big part of the reason why people remember it so much. It's the same reason, to me, why... even with how stupid and dumb Game of Thrones got in the last couple seasons, those first couple seasons, when the storytelling was on point, kind of trounced any sort of bullshit that came later on.
Yeah, I'll give you that. I'm glad that I asked you that, because that is true. Like, I that kind of made me remember, like, every time I watch it, like, I feel like I can just walk up to that little tree hut, grab a banana, and go sit by the beach and wait for Hurley to come out of the woods and say, we have to run now. Like, I felt like I was there. So for all of its flaws, for all of its, faults, I was in it, The immersion level was very deep. Now, I gotta ask you, because you kind of like, that was cool, and I'm glad you brought us there, and I want to take it even a step further from, because I'm trying to like be objective, right? That's the whole point of the show, to learn something. And this is a challenge for me this episode, because I mean, look at my shirt, right? And so
yeah, it's tough to be objective when it's one of your favorite things.
I personally don't know how this show has sort of held up. I mean, I know people still revere it, but do they still appreciate it in the same way? Do they still see it in sort of like the same light, or has it sort of fallen? But it's important. Is it's like, what I'm trying to say? Like, where is it cemented? Would you say? As now we're almost, I think, 10 years since the
10 years,
yeah, so
literally 10 years since the finale. Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting case, because I think that it would be very interesting, obviously, to see Lost kind of come out now in like kind of the media.
I don't think it would do as well, and that's coming from me.
it wouldn't, because the problem is that, again, another thing that helped define Lost is the fact that it was doing things that on TV that had never been done before. And now every other TV show is incorporating experimental things. I know we weren't a big fan of it, but look at the stuff that, like, Legion did. Look at the stuff that, like, even something that is, like, American Horror Story has done. Look at the stuff that, again, just like the networks, the networks like HBO and Showtime are, to me, like, the idea of making television cinematic is an idea that Lost helped jumpstart, and now is, like, been experimented around with so much that it's almost, like, become commonplace.
Yeah.
So I feel like, if Lost comes out today, it wouldn't have its effect, and people would pay more attention to kind of the storytelling techniques, and, in my opinion, poorer and poorer as they went on. And so I feel like that would be a big thing. But also just the fact of, that Lost wouldn't, I don't think it would have the same kind of fervor, obviously, because, again, it's not like it wouldn't be the talked about show. And so I feel like you take those two factors away, and all of a sudden that show's under a microscope in a way that it never was before, Like, before, it was like, okay, what's going to happen this week on Lost? And today, it would be a situation of where, like, oh, okay, what's the next thing that's going to happen on Lost? And even though I just said the same thing, those are two drastically different tones that I just
100%, and I think,
and there's a reason for that.
Yeah, you know what? That kind of, like, as we're getting closer to the end here, that kind of brings it back to when I was saying, like, for me, Lost is a time capsule, but I also think that the whole idea of, like, viewing Lost as a time capsule benefits the show in and of itself, because it was from, as we've said many times in this episode so far, an era of television that was, I think, very experimental and very forgiving of newer ideas, and sort of having a sixth season that introduces new things not getting answered. It's all about when it happens and where we are as, like, a society that views pop culture, and especially changing pop culture as the 2000s gave us. So yeah, you know what? I'm glad. I still am going to defend the show till I die, but I can see now, I think I'll be a little nicer to the person who doesn't see the magic of Lost. Instead of maybe being like, well, you're wrong, I'll be like, hey, here's why you're wrong. And I'll try and, so...
Okay, so first off, now you're finally starting to take the thought process of me, where I used to just shout at people all the time because they didn't like the same things that I liked. And now I'm kind of taking a step back and be like, oh, okay, I understand why you like this. Here's why you're wrong.
Right. You got to grow,
That's literally what I say. I'm like, yeah, because that's why critics do it. And I'm like, you're allowed to like what you like. And you're not the only one. Like I said, I have my one show, like Game of Thrones was my loss. Like, I watched that show every single week, and then when the finale sucked, I didn't freak out the way that everybody else did, because I'm like, yeah, it's over. It wasn't a good ending. Like, just from a storytelling perspective, it's bad. But, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to stop liking the stuff that I didn't like. Kind of this whole thought process that everyone has. I feel like the prequels really started this trend badly.
We always bring it back somehow.
That's kind of started to go. Well, yeah, it always comes back to that. Because the prequels obviously kind of started this really bad trend that I'm starting to be really glad is going away, which is the idea that, because there's this one bad part about the franchise, it ruins kind of the entire franchise, and I could not disagree with that more. Because I'm sorry, again, it's the exact same thing. The last two seasons of Game of Thrones don't ruin all the great moments that I had during Game of Thrones, the same way that the Star Wars prequels, and more specifically the Star Wars sequels, don't ruin the overall idea and fun that I can get from Star Wars. And it's the same thing with Lost. I enjoyed it for what it was. I don't love it. I don't hate it. I don't think that it's great. I recognize it for being revolutionary, for doing the things that it did when it did, and for the stuff that I like, that I get out of it, I'm not going to not like it. Like, I love the characters and the actors that they got to play them. Like, these are, for the most part, a great group of characters, one exception withstanding, which I'm kind of sad I didn't get to go into a little bit more of that. Actually, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to. I hate Jacob. Fuck Jacob. I think he's one of the worst characters ever written. I think he's one of the worst characters ever conceived of, just not only within the Lost verse, but within kind of the overall television landscape. It's one thing that he's a god figure, which are already uninteresting characters to write, because you can't. How do you write omnipotence and be interesting? The only way that you can pull that off is if you have like a Dr. Manhattan or a Superman who's literally just having an existential crisis and not doing anything and moping around. But Jacob's one step worse, because Jacob isn't having any sort of an existential crisis. He's just moping around and doing nothing and making people's lives miserable simply to prove that they can make themselves better. It's like, okay, that would be one thing, but now you're basically fucking around with the basic foundations of like logic. Not to mention the fact that he's such a poorly conceived character that he ends up coming off as like more of a villain than his own brother.
Right, in the very end, yeah.
Who by all standard definition, like with everything that was going in to back up why Jacob was wrong in his thought process and his executions of his plans, I almost kind of felt for the Man in Black. I was like, yeah, I kind don't want you to get off this goddamn stupid island. Fucking put an end to your misery and everyone else's
He was a
misery,
bad guy,
you know?
but he was
And then they
also
just-
a misunderstood bad guy. So
Yes, and that's why I liked it. I again, more so kind of into just the thought process behind Locke and the idea to kind of swap in Locke as a means of just kind of them wanting to use that to kind of tackle an alternative persona for Locke rather than like actually say, oh no, this is the villain, this is the smoke monster. You know, it was interesting, but I don't necessarily know if it worked completely in conception. But yeah, that was kind of just my little mini Jacob rant. Fuck Jacob. I think he's maybe the worst character ever
wow.
written.
Okay, I disagree, but I don't like him very much. But hey, so I actually wanted to do sort of like before we each gave our conclusions and put like a rating on this monster of a show, our favorite and least favorite characters. So why don't you just do your favorite character real quick?
Glad
And
you're continuing that trend. from
yeah, exactly.
Watchmen.
I mean, if we have to, if
Yeah,
it's a Lindelof
definitely.
property, especially
Yeah.
a TV show like this one.
Absolutely. I was about so this is going to be our trend that we start now every day with Lindelof property because they always have such
Exactly.
solid cast. We'll have to do this when we do our leftovers
Exactly.
watch. Yeah, I had a decent amount of favorite characters. Like the thing that I liked about the show is that not one character was similar to the other. Like they all had their own different unique wants and needs. And again, one of the fascinating parts, probably the most fascinating part, and why looking back, I think that the first season is the best in terms of just the storytelling, is that how they would have all these characters be on these different kind of missions and have their own goals and thoughts and wants, and then they would kind of just run into other characters randomly in background, you know, in their backstories, you know, like when Sawyer runs into Jack's dad in the bar and all that, and then how Jack's dad is also revealed to be Kate's dad as well. Like that's a thought process that like I feel like if that came out now, a lot of people would get annoyed by that. But back then, I'm like, I actually thought this was
So why
pretty
don't
cool.
you give like one
And so
main
with that
favorite
being
and then
said-
like maybe one or two honorable mentions we can each do?
Yeah, definitely. So my number one favorite, I could definitely say without a doubt, is Charlie. I think he's the most relatable, and I feel like, again, this is giving a lot, but I feel like kind of the relatability of the show died off with him. A big part of the relatability of the show died off with him, because as much as I love Season 4, the more that I think back, Season 4 might be my second favorite after the first season. I think the first season is objectively the best season, but Season 4 is just my absolute favorite, because it's fun to keep up with. The flash forwards were kind of something new that were added, and I feel like kind of the presence of the mercenaries there gave a new threat that I feel like had not been there before. It was kind of taking the threat, the overall ominous threat of the others in the first couple seasons and putting that in the forefront and kind of, you know, them having to work together. The only thing that I felt like that was really distressing is the others kind of went away for a majority of Season 4 until the end when they just came back and saved them. That was the only real gripe that I had with Season 4, aside from the whole moving the island and then we tackle into space, time, and all that crap. But yeah, Charlie was my number one. I feel like he was one of the most relatable characters, especially, you know, as an addict. I feel like ABC kind of taken the direction that they did with him. With that character, I'm glad that they didn't make that character as exploitative. I'm glad that they kind of really showed that, like, yeah, it's an illness, and kind of part of the brilliance of the backstory is that, yeah, it showed kind of a struggle that a lot of addicts go through, which is that, yeah, you know, their life sometimes isn't all fun and games. Sometimes they have good lives, sometimes they don't, and it just helped to ground that character a lot. And on top of the fact that Dominic Monaghan, I already think, was the best actor on that show. It's funny how he went right from Lord of the Rings into that. But in terms of some other characters, again, I'm about to name drop 20 here. I'm sorry, I'm breaking the rules already. But yeah, I really love Sawyer. I love Hurley. I love Desmond. Some other characters. Miles started to grow on me, even though I feel like he kind of never had the oomph. I feel like he had his one oomph moment, and then it kind of fizzled out, because by then it was like Lost was more focused on plot than character. Saeed was another character who I thought started off having a lot of potential, but that character specifically with his acting started to get really repetitive, and I'm like, okay, you're starting to kind of get a little bit of annoying. And then when they just basically turned him into a sociopath out of nowhere for kind of no reason, especially when it's revealed that, you know, Jacob, again, my least favorite fucking character ever, is the source of his misery, and then people are confused when he goes with the man in black. It's like, well, gee, what would you do if basically God murdered your girlfriend? You know?
True. Damn. Yeah. Wow. Good arguments. So I guess I'll start off with my least favorite. And you know, you might be surprised by this, but I gotta say I was not a fan of Kate. I'm really.
Oh yeah. No. Well,
I'm really never a fan of Evangeline Lilly in general, especially since
now.
well, yeah. I mean, all things aside, especially, you know, since she forced herself into The Hobbit too. I mean, I know she didn't do that, but like, you know, that character did not exist. Yeah, and I just think that like all she was really there for was to have a character to be yelled at, and she kind of like always made choices that clearly were, I think, A, to stir the pot, and B, like unnecessary. And so you can't blame her too much in regards to that, but I think that the way they were written probably translated way better than the way that she physically acted them out. And
Oh, I'll do one better. I'll do one better than that real quick. I'll say that besides the fact of after the first season, she is literally only there to be a romantic foil between Jack and Sawyer. Like that to me is literally literally to the point where her number one reason for wanting to go back to the island in the later seasons, besides Claire, which again is already manufactured and feels bullshit enough, literally to the point where by the time they actually get back to the island, it's just like, okay, how do we keep them on the island? That's like I said, where kind of those writer ploys, it's like it started to feel like ploys and not good storytelling. And also just the fact of, okay, so she gave up this kid who she'd been raising for 3 years just because she missed Sawyer when she was already screwing Jack. It's like that this is what kind of where like the points of where, okay, so this is why I don't like romantic subplots, but also, besides all that, the most egregious thing I find about Kate is the fact of when Lindelof directly was asked which 3 characters he'd want to be stranded on an island with, he was like, well, Kate, I think the third choice he brought up was Kate because she's nice to look at. I'm like, oh, really? Not because she can fend for herself, not because she can hunt, not because she's one of the only certified badasses on the island who's actually capable, can handle herself. No, because she's nice to look at.
Well, yeah, I mean, she is.
Wow, like, I'm not a big proponent of, like, the whole Me Too thing, obviously with women, but that's one of those instances where it's like, okay, come on, guy. Really?
Yeah, well, hey, man, no one's perfect. And but what I will say is, like, yeah, she obviously is, like, equipped for survival, but I mean, I just think, like, Kate's character on paper is really cool. I think that Kate's character casted by anyone else had potential, but I'm not an Evangeline Lilly fan, and I just don't like what she brought to the character. But, you know...
Yeah, I agree. I don't think she's a very dynamic
But you know who I think is a very dynamic character in this show?
Who's
Benjamin Lioness.
Yeah,
that is my favorite character of this show. And of course, I have a few honorable mentions, but dude, Ben has an arc that if I can write something as compelling as the Benjamin Lioness story in my life, even if it doesn't get sold, even if no one reads it but myself, I've completed everything I want to complete as a creator in the film medium. Because to me, I've never went from hating someone so much and then 5 episodes later making like just wanting them to survive and persevere in such like a bubble almost, because it's just like it happens so fast, but it doesn't take away from it for me. Like the Benjamin Lioness story is unlike no other on this show. He is the prodigal son who never was. You know, he could have been the chosen one, but really he was just like the step before the chosen one. And it's just so much fun to watch him like search for redemption. And I also love to fantasize about how he is now Hurley's servant just on the island. And I mean, dude, I haven't written any fan fiction down, but I could, because the amount of like stories I've dreamed up,
surprised you
know, and so yeah, Benjamin Lioness really is just such a dynamic character. And some other honorable mentions for me: Desmond, mostly because of the catchphrase. Just kidding. I mean, I love him. And see you in another life, brother. I mean, that's just, I love that. Say it all the time. It's so good. And I mean, dude, Desmond is just great. You know, Charlie, of course, he's my number 2. So.
Not
Penny's boat, man. I always wanted to make a t-shirt.
Penny's boat for life. That's I will say that, like, for as slow and dragging as season 3 is, and I will admit, of those first 3 seasons, season 3 is my least favorite the more I think about it. Oh man, that moment, that almost made it worth it. I'm like, okay, wow, that is powerful.
And
just to kind of
yeah, sorry, I just had one more. My last one is Claire, because it's sort of like another journey like Ben's, and they easily could have, taken sort of the Ben trajectory. I think at that point in time when Claire sort of went on her anti-hero journey, we clearly saw that like Ben turning to the light worked, but I'm glad that they sort of took it a bit of a different way and sort of gave her own unique fall from grace. I thought that was really cool and very interesting, and I think it was very true to the character.
Yeah, so all that I'm going to say about that is specifically with Ben and Claire. I'm actually interested that you brought those two up. Those two storylines and arcs specifically with me are kind of, again, reinforcements of kind of the idea of Lost trading up good storytelling for what I'm going to call shock and reveals, or as that one YouTuber whose series that I sent you, whose name I'm currently not remembering, called Fake Mysteries, which is in the sense of where Ben Linus has all of the seeds to be a great character, but considering all of the great villain arcs, for lack of a better word, villain/anti-hero arcs that I saw both at the time and now, like for me, if you want to just take straight villains, like I feel like what they did with both Stringer Bell and Marlo Stanfield on The Wire alone is like, wow, like that's how you do a villain. The thing that I the problem that I have with Ben's arc specifically is that they couldn't decide whether they wanted him to be a straight up villain or whether they wanted you to have that you just like had understood and had empathy for, or whether they wanted you to like have some sympathy going forward. You know, the kind of wrestling between those two different ideas, and they kind of tried to play it both ways, and that's one of the things that that character just became too inconsistent for me at the end. And like, I enjoyed the performance, I enjoyed the character, like his origin is great, but he just became too inconsistent of a character. It's the same thing with Claire, honestly, where they bring back Claire when clearly it's just like, okay, you had her hop out for a season, and then you just bring her back, and so she was just on the island during all those time jumps. That's just where kind of like the logic of my brain like can't exactly line up with the show. And also when they bring her back, you want to talk about the idea of just psychopathic characters out of nowhere on that character. She goes full Jungle Savage, Jonestown, and then everyone is just kind of cool and rolling with it. Again, just like little logical pieces that I can't really wrap my brain around completely.
Well, you know, it's time to jump into conclusions, and I will say that I couldn't disagree more, but it's okay because there are Locke people and there are Jack people. And not everyone can be, you know, both. So with that being said, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting take, and I see some merit there. I disagree, but I'm sure other people agree with you because that's just the kind of show this is. You either have people who have a yes or a no, but there's no middle ground. They either feel strongly about one thing or strongly about another. And with that being said, Dom, let's wrap this up. How did you feel about Lost overall, and what kind of rating would you give it?
Gotta get my brain going here for this conclusion. Okay, so here's what I'll say. Lost, I think I've already spewed enough repetitive phrases about Lost was revolutionary. I wish I could come up with different words to substitute for other words, but I can't. My brain is just incapable of doing that at the time. But whatever. I think that Lost is a very entertaining watch. Despite its many problems, and it does have problems, I would still recommend people to watch it. I think that there is a lot that people can get from this show, and what I also like to do is just because, you know, what I like to say to, if I can kind of offer my 2 cents for aspiring creators, because I know that's something that you like to do a lot, but if I'm offering up my 2 cents, I would say the brilliant thing, and I think the thing that you can kind of get from Lost is you kind of learn how to write, and you can learn how not to write. And that, I think, is just as important as, like, watching the best in order to get examples. You know, like, one of the things that I feel like was missing from film school when we were there is, yeah, we were shown a lot of examples of how to do something great, but half the time, those were just anomalies, you know? What about, I feel like if they kind of had reinforced the examples of, okay, this is what you don't do, and here's why you don't do it. I feel like Lost is a perfect example of that. Literally to the point where it's completely split down the middle, where the first 3 seasons are mostly character-focused, and then the last 3 seasons are kind of plot-focused, for lack of a better word, and it can't really decide what it wants to do. And so I feel like that, to me, is why Lost is a great example of that. But also, I think it's a very entertaining show. I think it's a well-made show. I think the characters are well thought out. It's interesting and good storytelling. The iconography, to me, is rivaled only by a few shows. And yeah, with all that being said, like, I'm not going to say I hated watching it. I actually really, really enjoyed it. Like, to the point where when they were introducing some of the more batshit and insane things that they were doing in the last couple seasons, even when it was getting to the point where I'm like, okay, this started to defy logic just a little bit, I was still on board with it. And there's not too many things that I can say did that for me overall. And so, with all that being said, I guess my overall star rating is, I'm going to go with 3.5 stars.
I feel that. 5. I respect that. That was you make a good case for it. If we come to me and if I have to do this, and of course I do because it's our show and I sort of pose.
You do. You are legally required to.
Exactly. And so I would say that, you know, for me, Lost isn't about the destination, it's about the ride, and it's a ride that I've taken many times since because I love it so much. I can forgive just about everything on this show, and if you have another 4 hours, I can explain to you why you should forgive it too. And I think not many shows sort of give you the territory to dive in deep enough where you can do that, where you can pause frames, where you can, you know, even go as far as to try and look up translations for the hieroglyphs. And with that being said, like, dude, these are the shows I live for, the shows that have just way too much going on that, like, you kind of have to stop watching everything to get fully everything in the show. And so that's why, like, yes, I see exactly what you're saying. I think that was actually a brilliant way to describe it. This is a perfect example of what to do and what not to do. But to me, you know, Lost is inspiring for one reason mainly. It's because it kind of just did what it felt was right, and in the moment too. And I think like you kind of have to live in the moment as like a creator at some point in your life, because your song will never be perfect. Paul McCartney said he never wrote the perfect song. And this is like from a year ago in a Rolling Stone interview. So if he's saying that, you just got to live and let live sometimes, and just put out the best that you can do in that moment. And so I respect Lost for that, because to me it's very earnest, and it feels very just authentic, and there was nothing like it. So I'm really glad we had Lost, because I don't know if we would have had Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones. You guys have heard the whole podcast at this point. You know what I'm trying to say, and what I'm trying to really say is that Lost is a perfect 5. And if you don't agree, don't at me, because I don't want to hear your opinion. If you don't, no, I'm just kidding. But to me, it's a perfect 5, and I love it. And
Chris has revealed his ultimate Lost fanboy.
And let's talk about why you don't like it as much, and let me change your mind. So with that being said,
let me tell you why you're
exactly.
wrong.
And where can they find us to, if I had to tell them where they were, why they were wrong and where they were wrong, where can that happen? Where does that take place, Dom?
Oh, well, this channel was streaming on my personal YouTube channel, that being Movie Nerd Reviews. But if you want to actually hear more of us, or in this case, watch more of us, you can check us out at our name, the Talkin TV podcast. I'll figure out a way to flash graphics. There's actually a way to like push graphics through here at some point. I just have to figure out how to do it.
Cool.
But yeah, Talkin TV, type that into any place where you listen to podcasts: Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Radio Public, Stitcher, Pocket Casts, Google Play. Any places you can listen to podcasts except SoundCloud. And as for where you can follow us on the social medias in order to find out more information about what's going on the Talkin TV podcast, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and now, brand new, on YouTube.
Yeah, we got big plans on YouTube, and we're going to be doing a lot of fun stuff. And as time goes on, even different types of content that will be sort of YouTube exclusive. But you know what? Like Lost did for so many seasons, I want to keep them in the dark on that one for a little while longer. And sort of jump into where you guys can find me. You can find me at Christian Evanko. That's my first and last name. Don't wear it out. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the good places. I make music. Just go to my pages and click the little link in my bio, because I have my own music, which is under my own name. I have my band. I also have another podcast, and I made this nice little link that consolidates it all for you in one place. So just go to any of my personal pages, click that link, and it'll bring you to anything you want to find. And hey, you know what? If you're there, I appreciate you for being there. If you're here right now in our live stream, thank you so much. And also thank you to everyone who's been listening to our podcast, Talkin TV. It really does mean a lot to me. And so with that being said, Dom, why don't you tell them where they can find you? And then you said you had a message you want to leave them with today, I think?
Do I always? Yeah, you guys can find me on all of my social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all under my one name, Movie Nerd Reviews. And Chris, without further ado, there's only one thing that I can leave the people here with, which is for our first official live stream, which we pulled off with absolutely no problems. Watch more fucking movies, people. We out.